Hi, I'm Abby Chick. Welcome to our three-part series where I will teach you how to make more trend-forward designs for your flower shop. In the first video, we will get right down to the heart of the most important part of the design, which is the flowers that you'll be using. You probably have your favorites that you've been using, but I'd like to take you through some of the varieties and the reasons why I use them day in and day out in my flower shop. Not only does it have to do with their longevity and performance, but it's also because of their unique characteristics like their color and their shape and their form that makes them perfect for the style of design I'll be sharing with you. First, I really want to talk about greenery. It's the most important part of your design. It's the base of everything you're going to be making. And I think when we are classically trained, we typically go for the bundle of pit or leather leaf. And while I still use boxes of this in my flower shop every single day, I want to encourage you to really start to rely on mass greenery a little bit less, because the style of design that's a little bit more open forward and airy really relies on a structure that has a lot of linear quality to it and dance. So the first is Plumosa. I really like this for its arcing shape and for how dainty it is. So we always keep Plumosa in the shop. And also, not only is it really economic, but it lasts forever, even without water. We use this all the time in installations where we don't have a water source and are able to then pull it out, reuse it, put it back in water, and use it for our retail arrangements the following week. I also really love Springerai. It's one of my favorite greeneries because of the texture and the color. So while it typically does have a nice arcing line to it, a lot of times I will bisect it, cut it down, and put it right down into my arrangement just for some low lime green texture down into the base of the arrangement as well. It's very supportive. Of course, it does have those thorns that you have to watch out for, and it is a little bit less hardy than a Plumosa. So the way that I like to keep it hardy and fresh in my shop is, instead of just cutting it and putting it in a bucket, I actually keep it in a plastic bag misted down, and it seems to hold a lot longer. If I could only ever use one greenery again for the rest of my floral design career, I would probably go with Huck. You can get it pretty much all year round, and it is so versatile. I really love that it has a strong, sturdy branch, so it makes a really nice framework for your designs. You can kind of keep it long with really interesting arcing shapes, or you can cut it down short and even use it more like a mass in your base. So while I do recommend using two types of texture, such as greenery or filler in your designs, I've been known, when I don't have the budget to use as much product, just to use one or two stems of Huck and break it down to both fill that mass at the base and the extending lines. I'm sure we're all familiar with Ruscus. I prefer to get the long, even though it's a little bit more expensive and only typically comes in like a 5 to stem pack. You can really cut it down into an arrangement and use one stem to green out your entire arrangement. It's also extremely long lasting and versatile as well. I think for a long time, we really relied on eucalyptus as our go-to greenery. I don't prefer it for basing out my arrangements. Most of the time, I find that gunny is just a little too wild and textured and doesn't offer a lot of support. Seeded gives you really beautiful drape and interesting texture, but it doesn't really offer a lot of support either. And, Silver Dollar is just kind of too much in your face of a form to blend for a lot of arrangements. So that's why I really switch to acacia foliage when I'm trying to get that blue tone greenery. First of all, it doesn't have a smell, which some people love. I do not like the smell of eucalyptus, so that was the main reason why I switched. But I also just find the shapes of the acacia to be a little bit more interesting. So this is Pearl Acacia. You can get this, about half of the year at different times. You can also get knife blade acacia and my other favorite, purple fern leaf. And I love that because that has that darker sort of plum purple worked into it. And we're going to be talking about bicolor varieties and why they're so important to making successful designs. Another seasonal favorite that we like to use in the flower shop is Grevillea. This is the natural. You can get Ivanhoe or even some that's a little bit bigger of a leaf that has the gold sort of fuzzy back. So Grevillea is really great, super, super cost effective, really great price point on this one. And it also lasts for a really long time in your cooler as well. Another greenery that we really rely on at different times of the year is olive foliage. As you can see, it has a ton of laterals. So while this is very linear, you can really cut it down and edit it to get some interesting lines. And also, it goes a long way, a lot of bang for your buck when you get this many laterals on one stem. I want to dive right into mass flowers. In our flower shop, a lot of them are also known as the basics. We're talking carnations, roses, hydrangea, even Gerber daisies. Some of the things you should be looking for in your flowers. You can use a lot of your old trusty favorites, but what's really important is to look for varieties that have interesting color characteristics. So for instance, some of the roses I want to show you have a lot of variegation within their petals. So instead of just looking for a straight orange rose, like an orange crush, you could go with something like a high-end orange. This makes it easier to blend into different palettes, and it also makes it easier for designers not to have sort of these harsh color blobs with no transition. Another one of our favorite varieties is a Kahala rose. It's a standard rose. It holds up for a really long time, but it's sort of got that cup shape to it, and it looks more like a garden roses. So, 10, 15 years ago, we would have customers who came into the shop and would know to feel the roses and how tight their buds were. They were looking for that tight bud for longevity. Over time, we've seen that transition to where our customers really are looking for more of that soft garden open shape of a rose. So we've had to sort of transition the ones that we're normally used to getting, which, like a Freedom Rose has the tightest head, where now I like an Explorer. It's that same beautiful red, but it opens up a little bit bigger and it just holds that shape for just as long. So it can be tricky. You'll have to experiment with the different varieties. One that has been tried and true for the last 20 years has been the Sweet Unique Pink Rose. I really keep coming back to it because it holds for a really long time. It stays tight and firm when you touch it, but those petals on the outside just open up, and it's also a really good variety to reflex if you need to get it a little bit bigger. So those are some of the things that we're looking for when we're buying rose varieties now. And as you can see, same thing. It's not just a straight hot pink or a light pink. It's got a little bit of both, which makes it very blendable. Carnations. I'm sure many of you who have flower shops, who have worked in flower shops, are used to customers coming in and say, oh, I like anything but carnations. And I personally feel that they've gotten a bad rap because of the designs that they were used in and how they were used instead of the flowers themselves. They're actually my favorite, and you'll notice that I carry a lot of novelty mini carnations and carnations in my shop for that same reason, where they have tonal variation and variegation to them. So you can really change the customer's perspective just by looking for some of those more interesting varieties. This is actually a Piet, which is It's not quite red, it's not quite orange. It sort of has this rusty feel, and then that really light tinting there to the outer petals. This is one of my favorite carnations to use, and later on in the teaching video where I'll be demoing arrangement for you, you'll get to see these in action. Hydrangea is something that is still a staple in our shop. We actually end up getting a box of blue, a box of white, and a box of green every week. I think a lot of times people have this misconception about hydrangea that they're not long lasting, but I find that if they're conditioned properly and they have water, they're actually one of the longer lasting flowers in our shop. Okay, Gerber daisies. Love them, hate them. I think they're a flower that has kind of fallen out of favor like lilies, but I think that also can be related to misuse and sometimes the color combinations. So I wanted to show you a little trick because I actually really still love Gerber daisies, but found it hard to work with them earlier in my career. And I also found that my designers had a harder time working with them. And what I realized was it was actually a proportion issue. So this is a standard size white Gerber daisy, okay? And that's actually pretty big. So if you were doing event work or large scale funeral design, a full size Gerber daisy is going to be good for you. But something you have to watch out for is that dark eye. So the dark eye in the center, because of the contrast and the size of the Gerber, it draws your eye right to it. So when like a bullseye, if you're not careful with your placements and how you build depth, these can really take away from how fluid a design is, the rhythm and the movement. It's like a big stop sign. And so I find that if you want to use these, it's actually a lot better to get the mini Gerbers. So they're a little bit less expensive, but you can get some really interesting colors in the minis. So this is a really, really dark pinky purple. And I don't mind the dark eye on a darker Gerber, but when I'm using a lighter Gerber, I tend to go with a light eye. It makes it easier for my designers to use them and not have to think so much about where they've got this really dark center. I also wanted to show this variety because I really love the color variation that you get. You've got kind of that yellowy peach into more of that darker. It sort of looks like a beautiful sunset. So this is one of our favorite Gerbers to use in the fall. When I first started designing flowers, I had never even heard of a ranunculus. Now it's something that I can't imagine not having in my shop every day. It sort of has taken the place of the everyday expensive flower. So, 15 years ago, when we knew that we had to stock an expensive flower in our shop, we were really looking for orchids or calla lilies. I think now, because the garden style trend has become so much more popular, your customer base is really looking for varieties like the ranunculus and garden roses. So I tend to get ranunculus in a couple of different colors. They're available all year round, and they're extremely long lasting. I can also assure you that if you break a head a little bit or you get bent, you can actually still use these. Later on in the design videos, I will show you how you can save a ranunculus when he's got a split in him or a weak head. Transitioning now to some of those secondary blooms that are staples in the flower shop are spray roses. These are my favorite flowers to use because they really feel expensive. They add a lot of perceived value to any arrangement, but they take up a lot of mass. So these will usually be tucked lower into my design. And if you're lucky, you can get a stem that has long enough laterals on it to where you can cut it down, stick the heavier cluster lower into the base, and then float the single bloom just a little bit higher. They come in every single color under the sun, which is also a good reason to stock them. Here we have a silver purple lavender spray rose, and then my favorite, a white majolica. It's used very heavily in bridal work, but it's also our go-to white to keep into the shop. I love using it in corsages. If you're looking for a true white, I think that white majolica is probably not the way to go. You'd want to go with something like a snowflake. All that means is that you're going to just lose a little bit of that open garden-y quality. When I started designing in a more artful, trend-forward way that had a lot of like loose and airy qualities to it, I found a roadblock I kept running into was that I simply didn't have the right material stocked in my flower shop. I was really missing the one quality that it needs the most, which is linear movement. So you can't really get by with the old standard liatris to be, your go-to line flower. You need something that's got just a little bit more whimsy and curve to it. So I really love a delphinium for that. Specifically, sky waltz and sea waltz are my go-to varieties. I think that they have nice wiggle and shape to them. They're usually packed with a lot of blooms way down the line too, so you can bisect them and get several insertions, and you get these extra bonus little laterals. Same thing that I like about a larkspur. Sometimes they come in a little bit straighter, but sometimes they have some more movement to them. But it's these beautiful laterals that I really love most because you get a lot of mileage out of one stem. Of course, you can do campanula. That's a really lovely garden flower that I find as it's bred more each year, it gets hardier and hardier and is available longer throughout the year. Snapdragons are another go-to. They come in every single color. And even though they can be a little bit more expensive than, let's say, a stock, they last for a really long time. Oftentimes, our customers will tell us, even on week 2, that the Snapdragons are still going strong. So Bells of Ireland, a lot of the staples that you've been using are still going to work in these arrangements. It's just important that you have a lot more of them instead of just using them for, large funeral arrangements. If you're not doing that roundy moundy style anymore, you're relying on a lot more linear material day in and day out. We all know that line flowers can get expensive, so it's another reason why you have to get good at building implied lines. So status. A lot of you probably just use sort of that one shade of purple status. I barely even stock it anymore. I like to go for softer colors of the status, like this blush and the lavender. But you can actually, if you only have enough money, let's say for 2 delphinium or larkspur, you can take the status down, insert it, and actually create an implied line using the status. You might just need to edit down some of those laterals and cluster them, sticking them into the design. It's a really cheap way to build that movement. Same thing. A mini carnation can really look just as graceful and delicate as a ranunculus if you take the time to edit down some of those laterals. So these can be tucked really low into the base of the design, kind of just to cover any mechanics. But this here, a stem of mini carnations, once it's edited, actually does the terracing work for you. Just stick that in. It feels the same as a snapdragon or a stock visually to your customer. One of our favorite flowers to use in the flower shop is a tulip. And starting pretty much in late October, you can get them all the way through until, late spring when the summer varieties start coming on locally. The tulip is that really special flower that gives us the interesting movement. Lisianthus is another go-to for us, but I will say that a lot of times designers don't do the necessary work to make a Lisianthus look as beautiful as it can. So again, we're just going to edit down some of these blooms and maybe even sacrifice, instead of having, two on the same plane, take those down. And I always save all of these laterals because they can be used for a smaller arrangement. I'm going to take off that green and then work to open up that bloom. So I'll reverse that where we have the smaller bloom and stick that into the design. Again, that really creates implied line without using a linear flower, but it's got that really nice dancey, floaty quality to it. I really want to encourage you as you start working with a new design style and aesthetic, not to abandon the flowers that have served you well in the past. I really just want to encourage you to look for more interesting colors. So these sort of creme brulee palms, I love this variety. It's got a ton of laterals on it, and it's just this really beautiful, soft, buttery peach. I think it works all throughout the year, not just the fall. It transitions really well into the spring. I really like working with pastels in general because I find that they blend colors so much better. If you take any of these sort of harsher, darker, true colors and add white to them, you're going to get colors that just make it easier for your designers to blend. And as you're working with a new shape, you want to make their job as easy as possible by supplying them with the flowers that are all going to look really good together. When I first started designing, I would reach for the leather fern and the pit as my two greens that I would use. And then eventually I expanded my horizons and started to switch to multiple varieties of greenery. My mind was really blown when a teacher explained to me that I didn't actually have to use greenery at all to start my arrangements. Really, when you're working with greenery to start an arrangement, you have to think about what are the qualities that you're looking for. You're looking for something that's going to create a framework and provide structure, and also something that's just going to really grab and hold your main flowers. So a limonium or even a wax flower, because of its branchy quality, can really serve that purpose. You don't have to have a greenery at all. Oftentimes I find that if I take out and use the shortest part of the main lateral, that top cluster is really fat. You'll also see that same pattern in a mum. So you could theoretically use a mum for your base texture as well. What you'll do is you'll cut out that top cluster where the laterals are really short and drive this deep into the heart of your arrangement. Then you can actually build some implied lines by cutting it again. This could easily be an Italian ruscus, but instead we're using a flower to basically do the same job. So on this side, I could have mums. On this side, I could have a wax flower or a limonium, basically doing the same job as my plumosa and my ruscus, but I haven't introduced the color green at all, which we also see that a lot now is sort of this trend where you're seeing just main blocks of color in a monochromatic color scheme where there's no green added at all. And if you're still sort of trapped in that way of thinking that you have to have a greenery to start your arrangements, it's going to be hard to, transition to that style if that's something that your clients are looking for. I hope I've introduced some new varieties to you guys today to stock in your flower shop. Join me in our next segment and we'll get right to designing.